No. The 2% standard is just a guideline, not a legally binding requirement. In 2006, even as the United States was increasing military spending because of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, European allies were shrinking their military spending. NATO defense ministers that year adopted a guideline suggesting that each spend the equivalent of 2% of its annual economic output on its military, but it was a target, not a rule, and not endorsed by heads of state. Only in 2014, after Russia annexed Crimea and intervened militarily in eastern Ukraine, did NATO leaders meeting in Wales agree to the 2% standard, and even then they urged members to move toward that goal by 2024, still 7 years away. No. Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama both pressed NATO allies to increase military spending. It was a regular theme of Robert M. Gates, who served as defense secretary under both presidents. In his final policy speech, before stepping down in 2011, Mr. Gates said Americans were growing impatient spending money on behalf of nations that are apparently unwilling to devote the necessary resources or make the necessary changes to be serious and capable partners in their own defense. Mr. Obama raised it during a visit to Europe after Russia's Ukraine intervention. One of the things that I think, medium and long term, we'll have to examine is whether everybody is chipping in, he said. And this can't just be a US exercise or a British exercise or one country's efforts. One way Mr. Trump is different is that he has made this a far more consistent and far more intense theme of nearly every discussion he has about NATO. He may have better luck than his predecessors at badgering allies into increasing their spending simply because he has made it the essential condition of America's relationship with the alliance. Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Secretary General, said last month that the number of alliance members that would meet the 2% target next year would rise to 8. Many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years, Mr. Trump said. No. This is not a matter of members failing to pay dues. The allies arguably may have less capable militaries than they should have, but none of them owe anyone anything. Europe may owe itself. It certainly owes nothing to the US, said Ivo Dalder, a former ambassador to NATO under Mr. Obama. If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves, the president said. He is offering an estimate of what NATO would have spent had all of its members abided by the 2% guideline, but there is no way to recover that money after the fact. Citing the amount not spent over the years is fine, said Alexander Arvershbo, a former Deputy Secretary General of NATO, but demanding back taxes is not justified and only alienates allies. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States, Mr. Trump said. Debatable. American experts have argued for years that Europeans can afford to have broader social programs that produce comfortable lives for their citizens, partly because they spend so much less on militaries knowing they live under the security blanket of the United States. Overall, American military spending is 72% of the total spent by all 28 allies. But the vast bulk of increased American military spending since the September 11, 2001, attack stemmed from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which were instigated by the United States, not NATO. There is little indication that the United States would have spent less money in those wars if Belgium, Spain, and Slovakia, for example, had spent more on their militaries. Moreover, Mr. Trump has not argued that he wants to reduce American military spending. He has just proposed a 10% increase in the base defense budget. Continue reading the main story.